For more than a decade, one simple headline has echoed across textbooks, documentaries, and classrooms. Humans left Africa 60,000 years ago in a single great migration that spread us across the world. It sounds clean. It sounds final. It gives the comforting sense that we know exactly when and how our story began. But that version of events is not what the evidence truly shows. In reality, the story of how our species left Africa is far more layered and far more human. It is not a single heroic moment frozen in time, but a series of journeys that unfolded over tens of thousands of years. Some groups ventured outward early and vanished. Others followed later and flourished. And together, they created the tangled ancestry that still lives inside us today. Genetic studies, climate models, and archaeological discoveries are now revealing a deeper, richer narrative, one that does not begin and end with a single date, but moves in rhythms shaped by the Earth itself. There were favorable climates that opened green corridors through deserts, and harsh droughts that closed them again. Populations grew, shrank, and split apart. Some mixed, some disappeared, and a few left traces that survive in our DNA, small but powerful echoes of the first people who dared to cross beyond their homeland. This is the story that rewrites the headline. It is the story of not one migration, but many, of 3 distinct stages that shaped every non-African alive today. And when you understand this deeper timeline, you may realize that our origins were never about leaving one place behind, but about humanity learning to move with the changing world. To understand how humans truly spread beyond Africa, we have to let go of the idea of one single exodus, and instead imagine a story unfolding in 3 great stages. These stages are like chapters in a long epic, each one shaping the next, each one leaving traces that still live within us. The first stage began around 127,000 years ago, when a portion of Africa's early population split from the rest. But this wasn't a sudden, clean break. Inside Africa itself, humanity was already complex, made up of many interconnected groups scattered across the continent, some in the west, others in the east and south, mixing and separating through time like threads in a vast web. Eventually, one branch drifted away genetically, becoming what scientists call the ghost population, the ancient ancestors of all non-Africans. This was the first quiet moment when our global story began to take shape, long before anyone actually left the continent. The second stage came tens of thousands of years later, when that same lineage passed through what geneticists call a bottleneck, a severe reduction in population size. Imagine a vast river narrowing into a single stream. Only a small group survived, carrying within them the future of everyone who would live outside Africa. This happened roughly 70 to 75,000 years ago, though the range could stretch from 60 to more than 100,000 years. That bottleneck didn't mark the first step out of Africa. It marked a dramatic contraction after humans were already living beyond it. For those who endured, it was a crucible of survival, shaping the genes and diversity of all later non-Africans. Then came the third stage, the branching out. Once the bottlenecked population began to recover, it split into regional lineages. One branch gave rise to the ancestors of Europeans and Asians. Another diverged earlier, leading to the people who would one day become Aboriginal Australians and Papuans. This separation occurred around 58,000 years ago. From there, humans expanded into Sahul, the ancient supercontinent of Australia and New Guinea, while others spread across Eurasia. These 3 events, the split, the bottleneck, and the branching, are the backbone of human history outside Africa. Yet they did not happen overnight, nor did they follow a simple timeline. They were driven by shifting climates, shrinking populations, and the restless curiosity of a species learning to adapt to a changing Earth. When we look at our DNA today, we can still see the fingerprints of those moments. Every one of us who lives beyond Africa carries the memory of that first split, the echo of that near extinction, and the expansion that followed. It is a story not of one migration, but of resilience, connection, and survival, the long rhythm of humanity finding its place in the wider world. When we talk about humans leaving Africa, the story usually focuses on the Great Wave that spread across Eurasia around 70,000 years ago. But hidden inside our DNA is a quieter, older story, one that began long before that major expansion. In a few living populations today, scientists have found traces of a much earlier migration, a journey that left behind a tiny but powerful genetic footprint. About 2% of the genomes of Papuans and Aboriginal Australians come from an ancient wave of modern humans who left Africa as early as 120,000 years ago. At first glance, 2% might seem trivial, like a faint shadow in the background of our ancestry. Some geneticists have even argued that it doesn't matter, that more than 90% of non-African DNA comes from the later, larger dispersal. But that small percentage tells a story that changes everything. It means that the earliest people who ventured beyond Africa didn't vanish completely. A piece of them endures today, alive in the DNA of those who call the islands of New Guinea and the deserts of Australia home. That fragment is not noise, it's ancestry. It is the whisper of the first explorers who stepped into a wider world and survived long enough to leave descendants. The genomes of Papuans hold even more secrets. They are layered, like pages of a book written across deep time. Within them are traces of that early Homo sapiens wave, later merged with the big out-of-Africa expansion, and woven together with the DNA of Denisovans, our mysterious cousins who lived across Asia. In fact, Papuans carry more Denisovan ancestry than any other people on Earth, suggesting multiple episodes of interbreeding with different Denisovan groups. This makes their DNA a living museum of human history, preserving the mingling of lineages that most of the world has lost. To picture it, imagine a tapestry stretched across 100,000 years. Each thread represents a journey, a meeting, a survival. In most places, the early threads have been covered by newer ones, their colors fading under later migrations. But in Papua and Australia, those ancient strands still shimmer through. They are the faint but unmistakable signature of humanity's first attempt to cross beyond its birthplace. This discovery reframes the meaning of success in evolution. The early travelers may have contributed only a fraction to our genomes, but their legacy is profound. It reminds us that progress is not a single triumph, but a series of attempts, some fading, some enduring. The 2% carried by Papuans is a genetic memory of courage, proof that even the smallest footprints can echo across time. Their DNA connects the first footsteps out of Africa to the living people of today, bridging 100 millennia in a single breath. To understand when humans could actually leave Africa, we have to look beyond genetics and archaeology and listen to the rhythm of the earth itself. Our ancestors did not walk out into an empty world by choice alone. They moved when the planet allowed them to move. Climate opened doors and then slammed them shut again. Every successful migration was not just a triumph of will, but also a moment of opportunity written in the language of weather, water, and time. Around 60 to 70,000 years ago, the period often cited as the Great Out-of-Africa Migration, the planet was anything but welcoming. Climate models show that northeastern Africa and the Arabian Peninsula were trapped in one of their driest, harshest eras. The great rivers of northern Africa had vanished into dust. The Sahara was a vast, scorching desert, and Arabia itself was nearly closed off by barren land. Food was scarce, corridors were blocked, and drought ruled the landscape. If you were an early human living then, the world beyond Africa would have seemed like a death trap, not a frontier. But the Earth has cycles, slow, powerful pulses driven by shifts in its orbit and the tilt of its axis. These cycles, called Milankovitch cycles, change the balance of sunlight between the hemispheres, altering rainfall patterns across Africa and Arabia. When the planet tilted just right, monsoon rains returned, turning deserts into grasslands and dry basins into lakes. These were the green windows, brief but life-giving moments when human migration became possible. Between 110,000 and 95,000 years ago, and again between 90 and 75,000 years ago, Africa and Arabia bloomed. The Sahara was no longer an ocean of sand, but a patchwork of rivers and lakes filled with fish, herds of animals, and green corridors stretching north and east. The Arabian Peninsula, now one of the driest regions on Earth, transformed into a landscape of savannas and wetlands. During these periods, early humans could have walked through grasslands and followed rivers all the way into Asia. When the climate shifted back to dryness around 70,000 years ago, those corridors closed once more, sealing off populations on either side. The world's first migrations were not one-way journeys. They were waves rising and falling with the planet's pulse. Humans likely moved out during wet periods, retreated or vanished during droughts, and then moved again when the rains returned. This climate-driven view of migration gives us a deeper sense of connection to the Earth. It reminds us that our species is not separate from the planet's systems. We are a part of them. Our ancestors didn't just conquer nature. They learned to read it, to follow its rhythms, and to survive within its shifting moods. The story of how we left Africa is, in truth, a story about how we learned to dance with the changing world, finding our future every time the Earth opened a door. If the story of human migration were a puzzle, genetics and climate provide two corners of the picture. Archaeology fills in the middle, giving us faces, bones, and places, real footprints of the people who walked these paths long before history began. And those footprints tell us something remarkable. Humans had already reached far beyond Africa long before the supposed single wave 70,000 years ago. In the Levant, a narrow bridge of land connecting Africa and Eurasia, fossils of early modern humans have been found at sites like Kavza and Skul in Israel. These remains date back nearly 190,000 years, suggesting that Homo sapiens had already ventured out during one of the planet's greener phases. More recently, a fragment of jawbone discovered at Mislia Cave was dated to around 177,000 years ago, evidence that our ancestors stood on the threshold of Asia far earlier than most textbooks once claimed. Further east, the deserts of Arabia have yielded equally powerful clues. In Saudi Arabia's Al-Wusta site, scientists uncovered a human finger bone, small but unmistakably modern, dated to about 85,000 years ago. Around that time, the Arabian Peninsula was a lush landscape dotted with lakes and grasslands, exactly the kind of environment early humans could have crossed. These finds match perfectly with the climate green windows that opened the door for migration. And the evidence doesn't stop there. In southern China, human teeth from Fuyan and Luna caves suggest that modern humans reached East Asia as early as 80,000 years ago, perhaps even earlier. In Southeast Asia, a leg bone from a cave dated to 77,000 years ago adds to the same pattern, a steady wave of movement long before the so-called Great Exodus. When we connect these discoveries, a picture emerges of exploration rather than exodus. People didn't rush out in one heroic march. They expanded gradually, in waves and pauses, following rivers, coastlines, and green corridors. Many of those early communities may have vanished or merged into later populations, but their presence changed the world forever. Every fossil, every tool, every bone is a whisper from those forgotten travelers, reminding us that the first humans to step into Asia were not myths or statistics. They were people, just like us, curious, restless, and alive to the call of the unknown. As humans moved farther out of Africa, they did not enter an empty world. They stepped into a landscape already inhabited by other kinds of humans, close cousins who had been thriving across Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years. These were the Neanderthals in the west and the Denisovans in the east. Species different from us, yet similar enough to fall in love, to share shelter, and to have children together. The story of humanity's expansion is not one of conquest, but of meeting family. In Europe and Western Asia, Neanderthals had adapted to cold climates, hunting mammoths and building shelters in caves. In Siberia and parts of East and Southeast Asia, the Denisovans lived in high plateaus, forests, and even tropical regions. Fossils and DNA tell us that when modern humans arrived, they didn't simply replace these people, they mingled with them. The evidence is literally written in our genes. Every non-African alive today carries a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA, and people from Melanesia, Papua, and parts of Southeast Asia also carry Denisovan DNA, some of it from multiple Denisovan groups. Recent discoveries reveal just how diverse that ancient world was. A fragment of a jawbone found under the sea near Taiwan suggests that Denisovans once lived much farther south than anyone imagined. In China, an ancient skull known as Yunxian hints at even older relatives, part of a lineage that may have given rise to both Denisovans and Neanderthals. It seems the map of ancient humanity was not a single tree, but a forest of intertwined branches. So when we imagine early Homo sapiens walking through Asia, we should picture encounters, not emptiness. They met others who looked almost like them, who spoke and dreamed and survived in their own ways. Some of those meetings ended in conflict, others ended in kinship. The result is that we carry their legacy inside us, a reminder that the human story is not a tale of isolation, but of blending, sharing, and enduring together on a shared earth. For years, the world has repeated a comforting version of our origins, that humans left Africa once, around 60,000 years ago, in a single bold wave that went on to populate the globe. It is simple, dramatic, and easy to remember. But simplicity can be dangerous when it hides the truth. Science rarely moves in straight lines, and neither did we. What really happened was far more intricate. The story wasn't one wave, but many. It wasn't one date, but a span of shifting times shaped by the planet's own heartbeat. First came the genetic split inside Africa that began the long divergence of our species. Then came the bottleneck, a population crisis that nearly erased our ancestors. And finally came the branching out into the world, when the survivors spread into Eurasia, Australia, and beyond. In between these events were smaller waves, early explorers who left traces in Papuan DNA and archaeological sites scattered across Arabia and Asia. Yet headlines reduced this grand sequence into one single phrase. Humans left Africa 72,000 years ago. They blurred the difference between the split, the bottleneck, and the later expansion. They turned a rich, multi-layered process into a slogan. But when we compress history like that, we lose what makes it human. The struggles, the chances, the climate shifts, and the quiet persistence of small groups who refuse to disappear. The deeper truth is that humanity's expansion was gradual and rhythmic, rising and falling with Earth's changing climates. It was not a march of conquest, but a long conversation between people and planet. The evidence, from our genes, from ancient bones, and from the patterns of rain and drought, tells one consistent story. We moved when the world allowed, and we adapted when it did not. So, the next time you hear that simple headline, remember the layers beneath it. Remember the forgotten explorers whose 2% lives on in us. Remember the meetings with other humans, the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, and perhaps others whose names we will never know. The real story of humanity is not about leaving one place behind. It's about learning to belong everywhere. We are the children of many journeys, shaped by chance, resilience, and the endless rhythm of a living Earth.